Sedna, mother of sea beasts. They were gawky youths, milling around outside the igloo and being pests, so shy that they had come courting in a group. All hung back, teasing each other, pushing the first one forward, then the next, no one daring to speak to the object of their dumb admiration. From what she could see, none of them was the least bit handsome, strong, or prosperous, and as for wit, that didn't figure in their scheme. In those early days of creation, Sedna was regarded as the loveliest girl among the Inuit people. The attentions of all sorts of young men, both local and from faraway lands, were nothing new to her and not particularly welcome. She could choose, and so she felt it was within her rights to be choosy. It was only sensible. "Go away," she told them. "I would more gladly marry a dog than any of you." That was her favorite way of dismissing suitors, and she said it often to many disappointed young men. "Oh, Sedna," complained Angusta, her father, when she came back inside. "When will you meet somebody good enough? I need help with the hunting. Ever since your mother died, it has only been the two of us. Would not a husband for you and a son-in-law for me be a fine thing? What if I married one of the men from far away and went off with them? How would you like that?" "I would be lonely, but if you took such a foreigner, at least I would only have to hunt for myself." "I'm not marrying just anybody," she said firmly. Time went by, and still not a week or month passed without some fellow arriving to ask for Sedna's hand, to awkwardly try to show off his prowess as a hunter, or to moon around ineffectually. All were turned away with a flea in their ear. One or two of these suitors wished he were a dog to have stood a better chance, because she was so beautiful and spirited. Others clacked that they were not dogs and need not have a wife so sharp-tongued and pitiless. Eventually, the stream of suitors became a trickle. "At least stop saying that about dogs," her father advised. "We have a dog." He patted their pet's eager head and went on. "There is ugly talk that you have married it, and that such a thing is bad luck and will bring bad luck on everybody." "Nonsense," Sedna sniffed. One day, a handsome, mysterious young man came to their seaside dwelling, dressed in furs and armed with an ivory spear. He was a striking figure. For some time, however, he sat in his canoe, saying nothing, just riding the gentle waves, watching Sedna going about her chores. Finally, she faced him, hands on hips, ready to dismiss him. Then he spoke. "You work hard for a beauty," he said in a rather nice voice. "That is very good to see." "But no good to you," she replied. She did not turn away, though, adding a cutting remark or speak of a preference for dogs. "Come with me. Come to the land of the birds. Come with me to where you will never be hungry or cold, where you will rest in my fine home on lush bear skins. Your lamp will be ever filled with oil, and the cooking pot always full of meat." He seemed to sing to her rather than merely to speak. "No, thank you," Sedna sneered before giving her habitual response. "I would rather marry a dog. I know. Everyone says so. But why not something else for a change?" "What?" she exclaimed. "Never mind. I think you would like my country. If you would only come there, what fine ivory necklaces I would give you, and..." He continued in a melodical vein, painting such a wonderful picture of his home that in spite of herself, Sedna became fascinated both by it and by the handsome stranger. Gradually, as he talked, she moved closer to the edge of the water, and he paddled near too. "So," he concluded, "will you come?" "Why not?" Sedna shrugged. As she glanced in the direction of her home, her father appeared and looked curiously at her and the strange young man. "I'll marry this one then," she shouted at him with a brief wave to him and the dog at his heels. The stranger helped her into his canoe, and they rowed away. leaving her father and the dog inconsolable. They would never see her on the shores where their home stood, and despite everything, they had been fairly happy. When, after a long time on the water, Sedna and her new husband came to the place he had so boasted of, she was shocked, though she had been subtly warned on the journey. Up close, once she was over her rather foolishly abrupt parsing from her father, and the tears in her eyes had cleared. She could see that her husband was not the man she had thought he was. There was something not quite right about him and his possessions, even the canoe. His home was a rocky island where nothing seemed to grow, where no animals could survive but the many squawking birds around the place. The fine abode he had described was just a shabby hug of twigs and stones where no human could live. The furs were nothing but a few scraps of uncurled animal hides. She turned to him in anger, in horror at his symmetry, but her words froze in her throat. The handsome young man appeared even less human now, his shape changing before her eyes, the human figure fading and the rather vague and ghostly image of a bird taking his place. "You are a bird spirit," she cried in anguish, "a koksa. That is what the Inuit calls such creatures." "Yes," her husband squawked, "but I can look human. I will be a handsome man again for you in a moment. I will bring you good food, and just look at the home I have made for you." "You have tricked me," she said, sitting down on a rock and bursting into tears. "I saw you first while I was flying, and that is when I fell in love with your beauty." "With my beauty," she muttered between sobs. Of course, the bird spirit did not know how people lived, and Sedna was physically miserable on the desolate island. The scraps of carrion meat he bought were disgusting to her, and the shelter was quite inadequate. Most of all, she could not get used to her husband, neither as himself nor in his guise as a vague and unreal man could she overcome her repugnance or her anger at the cruel trick he had played on her. Now, Augusta had never gotten over the sudden departure of his daughter and missed her very much. One day, he and the dog set off in the canoe to find her. People had seen where the young man had come from, more or less, far though it was difficult to find. Eventually, Augusta arrived to find Sedna utterly forlorn, lamenting her fate and delighted to see him. The bird spirit was away, and taking Sedna in his arms, Augusta carried her to his boat as the dog barked in its greeting. Covering her with furs, he set off, paddling as fast as he could. When the bird spirit returned and found Sedna gone and the marks where the canoe had been drawn up on the rocky beach, he took to the air again in search of her, guessing what had happened. He knew which direction to go in and soon came within sight of Angusta's canoe. Changing into his man shape again some distance behind, the bird spirit paddled hard to catch up. As he neared the fugitives, he shouted for them to stop. "Where is Sedna?" he cried. "Please, let me see her." Angusta ignored him and rode on as the bird spirit followed, calling out to Sedna. Finally, he gave up and turned back into a bird, swooping on them, still crying out like a loon. Then he disappeared, flying up into the growing darkness where he had caused the sea to become very rough and dangerous, throwing the boat about and frightening Angusta almost as terribly as the bird spirit himself had begun to do. The more he thought about what had happened, the more he realized his offense. As the storm worsened, he knew he had made an enemy of the powers of nature. In despair of his life, certain that it would bring bad luck on his people if he did nothing, and suspecting that it was the fate of his beautiful daughter all along, he picked her up and threw her over the side of the boat. "It must be," he called to her in sorrow. When Sedna, pale and in shock, came up to the surface, he reached up and clung to the side of the boat. The waves pulled at her, claiming her as she struggled to climb back into the craft. Frantically, her father beat at her hands, pried at her fingers, and in the end, chopped at them with a paddle. Sedna's fingertips were cut off, and for a moment she disappeared beneath the waves, but then she kicked and swam up once more, clutching at the side of the boat. Again, Angusta struck with the paddle, and now Sedna's fingers were cut off at the second joint, and she fell away under the sea. But then the third time she surfaced and held onto her boat with her bleeding hands, flailing at them in near delirium while the dog shivered in the prow of the small boat. Angusta chopped off Sedna's fingers at the knuckle. Slipping for the last time beneath the waves, Sedna sank. But the severed bits of her fingers turned into new sea creatures, even as she died a human woman. Her fingertips had become seals. The second joints uruk, or deep sea seals. The next joints caused walruses and whales to come into being. With the sacrifice complete, the sea calmed and soon the boats reached the shore. Angusta tied Sedna's dog to a tent pole and went inside. Horrified at what he'd done, exhausted by his labors and by grief, he threw himself upon his bed and fell into not so much a deep sleep as unconsciousness. Overnight, there was an unusually high tide which came up far the shore and swallowed up the tent and everything in it. Thus, Angusta and the dog were reunited with Sedna in the depths of the sea, where they still rule over the oblivion, those beneath us. Here, souls go after death to expiate the sins committed during life, for a period of time or for eternity, according to their deserts. As the spirit of the sea and mother of sea creatures, Sedna must be placated. This is not always easy, as she has little regard for humans. An Ankakok, or shaman, must spiritually journey into her domain, confess the sins of men, beg forgiveness, and comb the goddess's hair, for with no fingers she cannot do this herself. This simple act of homage makes her feel better, and in return she will allow people to take some of her charges for food. The end.